Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. As usual, it's been a pretty jam-packed week, but here we are once again with another graphical intelligence summary. So, again, kind of a busy week, but I think this one will be a little bit on the short side because a lot of these events have kind of worked their way out throughout the week. So, let's go ahead and get started. Starting with the Southwestern Region, we have the Pelican Island Causeway Bridge collision incident. This is one of those incidents where a lot of people are very, very concerned about it, especially in the context of what recently happened in Baltimore. However, this is one of those more routine sorts of accidents. Back on Wednesday, May 15th, a petroleum oil lubricant affiliated POL barge used for the storing of distillates and kind of moving things around in the region collided with the Pelican Island Causeway Bridge. The bridge itself has both a vehicle trackway and an old rail line. A piece of the rail line actually collapsed. Now, that rail line had not been in use for at least several years. That had been out of action for a very long time. The Pelican Island Causeway Bridge itself is very much in a state of disrepair before this accident actually happened. As far as I could tell, there have been many talks of being able to revitalize, replace, build a completely new bridge altogether for several years before this accident occurred. So, again, the bridge was not in really good shape before this incident, and now it looks like a lot of structural engineers are trying to figure out if the bridge is still viable. So the barge broke loose from its mooring lines, or a tow line parted actually, and it made contact with a couple of the pylons on the bridge. So again, this is one of those things where people are very concerned about it, but we have to remember, in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to like a barge breaking loose from its either mooring line or a tow line or something, this happens kind of a lot. This happens quite often throughout the United States. It's just due to the nature of the job, right? So this is something that is not on the same magnitude or scale as the Baltimore crisis, even though a lot of people are kind of trying to compare apples to oranges with regards to this incident and the Baltimore one. So just something to keep in mind. I know people are very concerned about it. The people on Pelican Island, they're kind of hosed for now. It's really hard to tell when the bridge is going to be open. The authorities haven't said anything with regards to a timeline for reopening the bridge to vehicle traffic, but as far as I can tell, there are several thousand, about 9,000 people living on Pelican Island, and there's a few other things on the island as well, a few manufacturing, some salvage companies, ironically, things like that. So, you know, this bridge being out of action is going to be very inconvenient, but as far as Pelican Island is concerned, there's nothing that's like a huge, major, gargantuan, super important critical infrastructure like hub. The things that are on Pelican Island that are important for critical infrastructure and like strategically important, they have their own docks and they don't use the bridge to get to work or to move things around. So it's going to be interesting to see how this whole incident shakes out, because it looks like it may be a very significant repair. So, moving on to the more interesting incident this week, there was an incident involving a Russian NOTAM off the coast of California. So a few people have saw this and freaked out all over the internet, mostly Twitter, and this whole incident has kind of snowballed into being, I think, more than what it really is. However, I didn't want to talk about it because people are still running with the original information, and it's over, it's canceled. So Thursday night, almost simultaneously with me dropping the wire for that day, a NOTAM popped up, a Notice to Airmen. This is sort of like a press statement or an informational release for pilots to be aware of things like hazards or no-fly zones or flight restrictions or things like that. We tend to monitor NOTAMs. That's why I have a whole video on discussing what NOTAMs are and why they're important. But we monitor these in the sort of open source community because they're kind of important, and they kind of highlight things that you may not hear from mainstream media. So, like clockwork, an interesting NOTAM popped up off the coast of California, just a square or rectangle box about 500 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. And here you can see the NOTAM. You can read the NOTAM for yourself and see why people may have been a little bit surprised by this one, but really the gist of it is right here. It says the Russian Federation plans to conduct rocket firings, impact area within the Oakland ARTCC, so on and so forth, with the coordinates for the box. So people were a little bit surprised that the Russians are going to be shooting rockets or missiles or something, and they're going to be landing just a few hundred miles off the coast of Los Angeles. So, of course, the internet spun up about it. no details come out because once the NOTAMs drop, really there aren't any amplifying information sources. You have to kind of like figure it out yourself or look for a press statement or something. But the NOTAM is very, very short. It's intended to be so that it can be transmitted to aircraft as they're flying. So again, NOTAMs are a really good indicator, but they're not the definitive story. They are what we call an indicator or a warning, indications and warnings for a more substantial incident. So just as the internet was kind of getting spun up about it, we were trying to figure out what's going on with this. Is this one of those sort of diplomacy by missile kinds of things? The NOTAM was canceled. We can see the original NOTAM was supposed to be for 10 days, which is about the length of a Russian naval exercise. It was supposed to go until May 26th, but it was canceled without explanation, without any kind of amplifying information. It was canceled within just a few hours. So is this a whole just kind of big mistake? Is this somebody with a typo, or what's going on? We don't really know. Now, I will theorize, this is just my own theory, but I will theorize that it could be one of two things. One, it could be a space launch. That's the most non-nefarious way of putting a NOTAM out. Russians conduct a space launch. The booster debris has got to fall back to Earth somewhere. Maybe it was going to fall within this box. That's fairly standard, not nefarious at all, fairly common. The only difference is the wording. The Russian Federation plans to conduct rocket firings. That's not something that's normally done when there's a Russian space launch, or an American space launch for that matter, or a Chinese space launch. They will put that in there. They'll put like a Russian space program or some kind of international space station thing, something like that. They will make you aware that it is in fact a civilian space mission. And not a military missile test or something like that. This is the NOTAM that we see when there's a rocket test or a missile test or something like a ballistic missile test. This is what we see. This is what it looks like. So I'm sure the people in Washington will just kind of brush it off by saying, oh, it was a Russian space launch that we just canceled. It's a non-issue. Don't worry about it. However, they're forgetting that this exact same thing happened a couple of years ago off the coast of Ireland. If anybody remembers that, I actually covered that, I think in one of the older standardized briefs, where Russia caused this big international scandal when they said, hey, we're going to be conducting missile firings, and it's going to be off the coast of Ireland within Ireland's fishing waters, their economic exclusion zone. So NATO freaked out, the UK freaked out, Ireland freaked out, everybody got spun up over it, and then Russia, like the day before the exercise was supposed to begin, said, oh, we're going to cancel it, don't worry about it. Oh, and the fact that we were going to do this exercise in the first place, that's disinformation from the West. Like, come on, man. Like, you know, the Russians tend to do that sometimes. So, again, you're probably not going to hear anything from Russia on this. Russia can't, or the Russian military, they can't go to the FAA. They don't have a way for, you know, putting in these NOTAMs themselves. So some coordination is taking place between Russian Defense Ministry and the FAA. So they have a way of creating these things, but I don't think it's automatic for a military thing. I think it has to come from the Russian Ministry of Defense to the DoD to the FAA. I'm not certain, so don't quote me on that, but I'm fairly certain that somebody in the government is going to know what this actually is, and whether or not they're going to tell the truth on it is up to them, I guess. So, again, this may or may not be over. It may be just, you know, absolutely nothing whatsoever, but this is the kind of thing that we should, you know, kind of stay on the lookout for. Russia loves to do these classic Cold War tactics. They love these Cold War tricks, man. It's like, for them, the Cold War never ended. I guess for us too, but they really love this kind of stuff just to mess with us. And so, you know, that's probably it, or it could be something along those lines. But again, kind of an interesting thing. I thought I wanted to point that out because of all the, you know, absolutely insane messages out there on the internet these days. You know, I thought I would kind of alleviate some fears on that regard. So, moving on to Eastern Europe, the big ticket item for this week was the attempted assassination. Hopefully it will just stay as an attempt, of Prime Minister Robert Fico in Slovakia. So this is one of the guys in, technically it's Eastern Europe, but you could probably say it's a little bit of both, where this guy was very much anti-World Economic Forum, very much anti-COVID lockdowns, very much, the West calls him pro-Russia, but he's, I guess you could say that is a fair categorization, but more along the lines lately he's just been anti-Ukraine. So just because you're anti-Ukraine doesn't necessarily make you pro-Russia, although that does kind of work out to be the case a lot of times. Basically, within the past couple of weeks, and even I think before the day he was shot, he canceled the funding for Ukraine. So, that's a huge deal. He was also instrumental in holding up Ukraine from joining NATO. So, he's one of these big dogs in that regard. And he was shot by an assassin this week. So, yeah, not super great. He was actually hit 4 times in the chest, as far as I can tell. He is still in very, very serious condition. He's undergone multiple surgeries. Some sources are claiming he's in a medically induced coma, so he's not doing well. But again, some sources within government, you get one deputy minister on Slovakian TV, and they say he's stable, and then the next guy says we're not out of the woods yet. So it's going to probably be a few more days, few weeks before we figure out his overall condition. So his assassin, interestingly enough, is a somewhat popular local semi-celebrity by the name of Juraj Sentula, who is I guess the title you could call him is basically just dissident. Extreme far left, activist, protester, demonstration organizer, poet, writer, local voice for being anti-Fico, right? So that's his whole kind of sort of arrangement for the past few years, is just to kind of oppose everything Fico has done, and now he shot him. So the story, however, gets a little bit deeper. So it's not just some dissatisfied political opponent. And this is where kind of the rabbit hole gets really deep, and the internet kind of has freaked out a little bit on this one as well. Not a whole lot of this is confirmed, so I'll just say that right up front. Not a whole lot of this is confirmed. It's kind of a developing story right now, but it doesn't look like this is an organic incident. This does not look like Sentula just deciding to go shoot the prime minister one day. This looks more like a very strongly coordinated and planned attack. Mostly because of Sentula's wife, which again, it's unconfirmed, but local sources claim that she actually is a Ukrainian refugee. So there's your tie back to Ukraine. It's like, we're not talking about connecting 15 dots here. We're talking about connecting dots that are touching each other at this point. So again, this is where the whole internet sentiment of this being perhaps our modern day Archduke Ferdinand incident, I don't know. I can't say for certain either way. But I do know that his wife has been detained in conjunction with this incident. Now, the reason for the detention varies widely. Some sources claim that Sentula's wife has been placed in police protection to protect her from the people who obviously see the Ukrainian connection. However, other sources claim that she's actually been placed under arrest in conjunction with this investigation. I can't say either way. Slovakian media is not exactly the most reliable thing in the world, and neither are local sources. So it's really hard to say what is actually going on. All we know with decent certainty is that the assassin's wife is in custody, somewhat unwillingly, though the reasons for being so vary widely depending on what source you go with. So again, developing story, don't have a whole lot of information, but I think this is a very deep rabbit hole, and this has very, very wide-ranging consequences. This is not just a Slovakia thing. This is directly tied to Ukraine. So yeah, this is just not a good incident all around. Speaking of Ukraine, there was a development this week with regards to Russia, and this was a somewhat surprising personnel change. Sergei Shoigu is out of a job, or he's transitioned to a new job. This one immediately, even describing the story, gets kind of politically inflammatory, because what we know is that Sergei Shoigu is no longer the Minister of Defense for Russia. He is now the Secretary of the Russian Council, Russian Security Council. So some sources, of course, NATO, Western sources claim that he was fired. Eastern European sources, Russian sources claim that he was promoted into a more strategic role where he actually has more power. And his replacement has basically been put into the position of Minister of Defense to signal the changes with regards to how Russia is now treating the Ukrainian war. The latter part of that is probably more true. Sergei Shoigu's replacement is Andrei Belosov. So he was a former deputy prime minister, or actually I think his most famous role was he was the economics minister. So he has no military background. He has no like national security. He never served on the National Security Council. He never served on any kind of like major strategic thing. However, he's now the Minister of Defense. And what I think is a lot more accurate is to describe this as being a personnel shift that is indicative of Russia's changing doctrine with regards to the Ukrainian war. Basically, Russia's digging in for the long haul. And personally, I don't think Russia's digging in for the long haul with Ukraine. I think Russia's digging in for the long haul with other countries as well. So you tend to not, just kind of like basic warfare 101, you don't replace your Minister of Defense during an active war. That tends to not happen unless there's a very serious incident, which I don't think happened. I mean, old Sergei Shoigu is very well known to be kind of a corrupt dude, but I mean, it's Russia, right? So that word doesn't really necessarily ring as heavily as it does in the West. But I think that replacing him at kind of, the height of the Ukrainian war kind of coming to a close sort of signals that, and putting an economics guy in charge kind of signals Russia trying to, wrap this thing up and then move into the next phase of Russia's development. You could say Russian expansion into something else or something like that. Either way, Putin himself has had a lot of speeches lately about, Russia's rise and Russia building again. So it's hard to say, but I don't think Shoigu was fired. There's no indications that he did it. There hasn't been any like gross military failure lately. The Russian army's been doing really good in Ukraine over the past year or so, despite all the Western sources, which are just, fantasy at this point. But, Russia's assault didn't go super well. Now, Putin does have, I should mention this, Putin does have a very long memory. And he tends to fire people, years down the line for things they did years in the past. So maybe he was fired or promoted out of the way up into the National Security Council so that he doesn't do kind of as punishment for this whole Ukraine war thing not going super well in the first couple of years of it. That could be it, but I think that more along the lines, this is probably indicative of Russia's changing mentalities and changing doctrine. And this is probably a little bit tied into the next category, which is in the Far East with regards to Taiwan and China, mostly China. So again, lately there have been an awful lot of Chinese incursion flights and PLAN ships in the Taiwan Strait, kind of harassing Taiwan in typical Chinese fashion. The Kinmen Island crisis has gotten a little bit worse, as we all know. Kinmen Island is one of those weird sorts of diplomatic things where it's technically Taiwan, but it's like 2 miles away from one of China's largest naval ports. That crisis has gotten a little bit worse. There have been a lot of drone incursions on Kinmen Island this week, in the past month or so. But with regards to China, and tying this back into Russia a little bit, there was a Chinese state visit, or a Russian state visit to China this week, which went very, very well for Russia and for China. And it would seem that really from the West, the biggest takeaways are that Russia and China are getting really close. They're getting really, really close. Generally speaking, China doesn't have any friends. China, as like on the state level, has kind of ticked off the whole planet because of the Chinese communist way of doing business. So they don't really have hardly any allies. I mean, they only have, hesitant business partners. As far as China goes, the major world power that's kind of been around for them is Russia. But again, Russia and Chinese tensions have been pretty significant. They both like have a lot of international détente back and forth over the years, but now it looks like things are coming together for Russia and China. Again, another major Chinese ally in the region is North Korea, but North Korea is such a case study. I don't think you can like bring them into this discussion. By and large, Taiwan incidents kind of increasing, China increasing flights and incursions within the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait, and Russia kind of being interwoven in all of this. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us the world's changing. As if we didn't know already, even just this week, Vladimir Putin in a few speeches like dotted around the country, he has mentioned the word multipolar several times. So this kind of shows us that's the theme basically for moving forward. And I think all of this is tied together. Russia's activities to shift the way the Ukraine war is going, personnel changes wise and like strategy wise, combined with China's actions in both the Taiwan Strait with regards to the Taiwan issue, but also in the South China Sea with regards to, them kind of pressing the Philippines a little bit. It's like, man, things are going pretty crazy in the international arena right now. And, America's kind of left holding the bag here, and we're just, arguing with each other in Congress and not really doing anything productive or even being aware of what's going on around the world. So, again, very, very interesting week. Not a whole lot of like emergency stuff, but there have been a lot of very, very strong indicators and warnings of a changing world on the international front with regards to Russia and China. The tensions between Russia and China in the United States have, I think you'd be really hard pressed to find a time where the tensions were higher. It's like, you just had little diplomatic incidents over the past few weeks that have kind of like solidified this, and things that like the poli-sci major would probably just notice more than anybody. And you're like, does this really matter? This incident? Not really, but it's just indicators, right? Like when Vladimir Putin left for his state visit, you can find the clips online. He gave Xi Jinping a hug, right? Like, this has, I don't think that's ever happened, So the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, who is very well known to be very reserved, like you very rarely hear him speak outside of like a taped, choreographed speech. You very rarely hear him make like an offhand remark about anything, and now he's hugging, like physically embracing Vladimir Putin, and he started the engagement, so it's like, that's a pretty big indicator. Same thing a couple weeks ago when Anthony Blinken was in China for the American state visit. Literally, there's a clip of Jinping standing around, just kind of waiting around, and he asked one of his aides, like, when is he going to leave? Like, when is this guy leaving? Like, is he leaving Saturday, or like, when is he going to be gone? And, China, or Xi Jinping personally, somebody who choreographs his moves very strongly, knew that remark was being taped and recorded, and that was a not so, subtle nudge to the American delegation to basically say, you're not welcome here, you're not wanted here. There was nobody to receive Blinken at the airport. Like, it's just like he got off a Lufthansa flight or something like that. Like, it's like, this is not like a state visit, like, go to baggage claim kind of thing. There was basically nobody there. They sent like a secretary or some kind of, driver for him, but still, it's like, man, these little things seem like they don't matter, but they really do kind of highlight China and the United States are not doing super well right now, even though we've got so much Chinese influence in Congress and in the White House. Good grief. You'd really struggle to find more Chinese influence in the White House than right now. And yet relations are still really poor. Same thing with Russia. Like, relations between the United States and Russia, it's like the world's kind of ignoring the United States and just doing their own thing, which we've known for many, many months. But coming into an American election season, I think you're going to see some pretty crazy stuff on the international front. We've already got about 18 different crises that are just stacking up, I'm just kind of waiting to see when is this going to pop off in this random nation around the world because Russia or China wants to poke the United States, because the United States has been poking them for almost a century. But you see how this kind of goes. It's a pretty complicated series of international incidents this week. Not a whole lot that matter for people who just want the quick, news. But if you want to understand how screwed we are in the international arena, these little things really start to add up. So I think I'll call it a day on that and mention some of the GhostNet reports. So like I mentioned last week, I'm going to start kind of integrating some of the news reports that I hear from my station sent to the GhostNet tag on JS8 Call. So again, if you're not familiar with this, I have a whole series of videos talking about what the GhostNet is. But I thought this would be a very interesting way to start to get people to start pushing their local news reports and actually start coming together and providing news and information on a local level that I can then highlight, every week and just show the usefulness of radio. So this is something new. I don't know if anybody else is doing this, but, this hopefully will be quite helpful. And since I mentioned it last week, you guys did not disappoint. So I did get several reports this week from my station that I heard personally. I also used an SDR. So I used a web SDR from, I think, Pennsylvania. That's the one I typically use because it seems to work a little bit better for me. But some of the reports I got this week were interesting. One of the ones I got, I had not heard about before, and I completely missed it when it occurred a couple weeks ago. But apparently on May 4th, going back quite a ways, there was a massive cyber attack in Kansas City, which brought down most of the city's governmental web systems. So you can read the report that somebody sent and kind of highlights what's going on with this. Again, this is me just kind of helping you get your local news out and show the integration of how radio can help us do that, because I had not heard of this. So that's very, very interesting. Something else somebody mentioned is the events in Texas with regards to the weather. So I got several kind of reports. It was very hard for me to get from Texas all the way out this way. I have pretty good coverage of the East Coast, but from Texas to Pennsylvania, that was a little bit too much to ask, I think. So I only caught little bits and pieces of the story. But we've got somebody talking about transmission lines down in the downtown area, I guess. I caught a reply from somebody which kind of confirmed to me that this was Houston somebody was talking about. I didn't catch who it was or anything, but somebody also said that it was a good test because they had no power and they were running the radio and cooking dinner at the same time. So again, this is fantastic. This is exactly what this is meant to do, to provide a way of making it as seamless as possible so that when you've got no power, when you've got no water, you're in a disaster situation, you can still be effective and you can still get the news, you can still share information, you can still have contact with the outside world. This is exactly what this is for. So thank you guys for participating on that. And there was one more comment I should mention of, I really didn't catch who it was from or who it was. I think it was a message to someone. But it was talking about how YouTube has removed 35,000 European videos for misinformation with regards to the EU cracking down on censorship throughout their region. So again, yeah, very, very important, because otherwise you're not going to hear that stuff, right? Yeah, this has been a really good success so far. Again, baby steps. This will improve over time. This will get better. And it will only, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And I can see a lot of people are putting a lot into it. So thank you all for that. This has been really, really great. And I think that this is a good way for us to start thinking about things like logistics and information flow and things like that, that aren't necessarily, in the internet sphere, right? It's really, really hard to have a sort of independent, freestanding information exchange service, right? But hopefully this will help quite a bit with regards to things like trying to be a little bit more resilient with your communications and things like that. So again, thank you all for watching. Here are the slides for this time, or the sources for this time. Not a whole lot again, but I think I've rambled on and taken up enough of your time this week, so I think we'll call it a day. We'll pick things up again on Monday with the Standard Wire reports, and I guess we'll see you next time. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you then. And as always, fight in the shade.